It is the year 2025, and President Donald Trump has implemented strong tariff policies, reviving a level of American protectionism similar to that of the late 1800s. And much like in the past, some nations are retaliating with counter tariffs, while other nations are voicing their outrage and caution against economic repercussions. Where will all this lead us, you might ask? Well, it is often said that if we want to see into the future, we can find answers in the past. And so in this regard, we can go back to the late 1800s to see how other countries responded to the U.S. tariffs imposed upon them. Let's start by looking at the effects of the McKinley tariff of 1890, which raised import duties to an average of nearly 50% and sparked a significant amount of international discontent. European nations such as Great Britain, France, and Germany viewed this as an aggressive economic move that undermined free trade principles. In response, several nations implemented counter tariffs in retaliation on American exports, especially on agricultural products such as wheat and pork. Germany, for example, responded by increasing duties on American pork imports by approximately 50%, citing sanitary concerns as a pretext for economic retaliation. This greatly affected American farmers, who relied on European markets. Italy raised tariffs on American wheat and corn by about 30%, while Spain increased duties on American manufactured goods by 25%, seeking to protect their own industries. In response, the United States attempted to negotiate trade agreements but also considered further tariff hikes on European goods, fueling diplomatic tensions and contributing to an overall decline in American exports to Europe. And then there was the Dingley tariff in 1897, passed under William McKinley as the president, which further escalated tensions by imposing the highest tariffs in U.S. history at the time, raising duties on imports to an average of 57%. This tariff had an immediate impact on global trade, especially with Canada, Britain, and France. Canada, who was at the time heavily reliant on trade with the United States, retaliated by increasing tariffs on American coal by 33% and on manufactured goods by 30%. This led to efforts by Canada to strengthen economic ties with Britain and other European markets, thus minimizing their reliance on American imports. In response to these retaliatory measures, the United States doubled down on its protectionist policies, maintaining high tariffs and seeking bilateral agreements with select nations willing to negotiate with them. Britain took a different approach to American tariffs, however. They adhered to a policy of free trade, and indeed did express concern over American protectionism, but did not retaliate with tariffs like the other nations. Instead, British leaders viewed economic retaliation as counterproductive, and instead sought to mitigate the impact by strengthening trade ties within their empire. They encouraged their colonies, including Canada and Australia, to develop alternative markets and trade relationships, both within the British Empire and beyond. This approach reflected Britain's broader economic philosophy at the time, which emphasized the long-term benefits of free trade over the short-term gains of protectionism, even as global trade dynamics were shifting toward more aggressive tariff policies. France, on the other hand, responded by increasing tariffs on American agricultural imports by 35% and on industrial goods by 40%. Additionally, France sought closer trade agreements with Germany and Britain to counterbalance American influence. In response, the U.S. considered further tariff hikes but ultimately began exploring selective trade agreements with nations willing to lower their tariffs on American goods. These American tariff policies seem to have put pressure on international relations, but they also had unintended consequences for domestic industries. While the tariffs protected certain manufacturing sectors in the U.S., they harmed agricultural exports, as foreign nations restricted their purchases of American farm products. Many American farmers, such as in the Midwest, suffered from declining foreign sales, leading to political discontent and calls for trade policy reform. Diplomatically, the U.S. faced increasing pressure from European nations to lower tariffs. The trade disputes fueled anti-American sentiment in some countries and led to growing advocacy for reciprocal trade agreements. By the early 20th century, the negative effects of protectionist policies became evident, prompting gradual shifts toward trade negotiations and reciprocity agreements. In the short term, these tariffs did provide several advantages to the American economy, however. Domestic industries, in particular manufacturing and steel production, saw increased growth as foreign competition was curtailed. Wages in protected industries also rose, and industrial expansion contributed to economic growth in urban areas. Additionally, government revenue surged due to high tariff tariff collections, helping to fund infrastructure projects and public services. But on the other hand, these policies also weakened international trade relations and led to economic challenges, mostly for American farmers. As the United States maintained high tariff policies into the 1900s, other nations responded with even steeper tariff trade barriers. Britain, for example, who originally exhibited a non-retaliatory stance toward American tariffs, began imposing a 40% tariff on American automobiles, while France continued to restrict American agricultural imports. Over time, these policies led to growing frustration among European nations, many of which viewed the U.S. as an increasingly isolationist and economically aggressive power. These contentious economic dealings contributed to a cooling of diplomatic relations, with some European leaders questioning America's commitment to international economic cooperation. In a way, this cycle of protectionism created a fragmented global economy, making it increasingly difficult for U.S. industries to expand beyond domestic markets. By the late 1920s, the cumulative effects of protectionist policies and foreign retaliation were evident. The global economic downturn, exacerbated by these restrictive trade measures, played a role in setting the stage for the Great Depression. However, the high tariffs had some lasting benefits for American industry, especially in sectors such as steel, textiles, and manufacturing, which experienced prolonged growth due to reduced foreign competition. Additionally, increased tariff revenues helped fund national infrastructure projects, bolstering internal economic development. And there were benefits for some retaliatory nations as well. These protectionist policies of the U.S. encouraged economic self-sufficiency and industrialization for these other nations. Countries like Germany and France used tariffs to stimulate domestic production, reducing dependence on American imports and fostering economic diversification. Over time, these developments contributed to stronger industrial bases in several European nations, positioning them for economic expansion in later decades. So history shows us that while tariffs can temporarily bolster domestic industry and government revenue, they can also come at the cost of things like tense foreign relations, decreased export opportunities, and even retaliatory measures by those countries that are affected. And as in the 19th century, today's tariffs are indeed prompting other nations to respond with tariffs of their own, creating a tense and uncertain global trade environment. Whether this path leads to greater self-sufficiency or deeper economic discord remains to be seen. But if history is any guide, the road ahead will be shaped not only by domestic priorities, but also by the reactions of an increasingly interconnected world.